Welcome to the third biomass webinar in our series, and I'm delighted to welcome Marlee Giacometti from American Farmland Trust to tell us today about the Midwest Bioenergy Crop Coalition that AFT has been coordinating. So Marlee is a Midwest program specialist for AFT, and she's based in Illinois and provides project coordination and technical assistance for generally crop diversification efforts in the state and in the Midwest. She also provides programmatic support for AFT's Women for Land initiative and the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities project in the Midwest. Before working at American Farmland Trust, she was supporting regulatory affairs work in the biofuels industry and has on-the-ground experience working in diverse farms around the country. So with that, keep putting your soil temps in. And before I fully welcome Marlee, one more highlight here. Anya, we forgot to introduce you last time. Do you want to jump on and introduce yourself and the recordings?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I am Anya Connect, and I am the Assistant Director for the Regenerative Ag Initiative, along with Emily Heaton at the University of Illinois. And great to have everyone here.
Anya just posted in the chat the recordings from our previous webinars. They can be found on Illinois Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and Environment YouTube channel. So the direct links are there in the chat, and we'll follow that up with an email. So now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Marlee to hear more about the Midwest Biomass Coalition. Take it away, Marlee.
Thanks, Emily. I did have some intro slides about the biomass webinar series. I'm not sure if anybody wanted to touch on those before I dive in, but those are here.
Just as always, we thank our sponsors for this work, and I think the next one have the schedule.
Yes.
And so next up, we will be welcoming DK Lee. We have members of his lab in the call, if DK is not already today, talking about the state of the switchgrass industry. All right, thanks, Marlee.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much for having me today. Really looking forward. I mean, this is an amazing lineup of speakers in general, but just the fact that we have a webinar series focused on all of this work is really exciting to see. And so before I dive into the work that our coalition has done, I just want to take a moment to introduce American Farmland Trust for those who aren't familiar with our organization and the larger project that this work falls under for me personally. And so American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to 3 tenets of agriculture. We focus primarily on farmland protection, keeping farmers on the land, and promoting sound farming practices. And so the work that I do falls under this last category, where we're supporting crop diversification efforts across the Midwest, some of which include perennial cropping systems, veg production, and other opportunities to diversify farms, thus strengthening farm resilience in the region. And so I'll share a little bit about the larger part of this project where the coalition falls, and the work that we've been doing in partnership with Argonne National Laboratory. And so we like to call this project the Perennial Bioenergy Crop Diversification Project. We should have been a little bit more catchier with our title, but that's what we've been calling it. And its intended outcomes are to support the transition of marginal row crop farmland in the Midwest to grow perennial bioenergy crops that can provide additional economic opportunities to farmers while providing environmental outcomes on the farm as well, related to soil health, water quality, and biodiversity improvements. And so in addition to this, we're also supporting Argonne National Lab in their development of a geospatial decision-making tool around planning and adoption of these crops. And for this project, we're focusing primarily on herbaceous and short rotation woody crops for regional relevance and adoption feasibility. And so we provide one-to-one technical assistance for interested farmers and landowners, as well as educational programming to increase awareness around bioenergy potential of switchgrass, miscanthus, native prairie, shrub willow, and a few other crops. And I should mention too, this project is funded from a research and technical assistance grant provided by the Department of Energy's Bioenergy Technologies Office, otherwise called BETO. And the project began in 2022 and is evolving now to focus more on supporting education and advocacy towards a regional bioeconomy, in addition to working with farmers on the ground to support adoption. And so that's why the formation of the coalition was so crucial for this work. Because we recognize that the historical challenges at play related to scaling adoption and utilization of these biomass feedstocks, we decided that broad stakeholder engagement would be extremely valuable to advance this work. And so as part of this project, we formed the Midwest Bioenergy Crop Coalition in the winter of 2022, and we've been active ever since. And so we know that the most meaningful and effective way to create change in this space is to gather stakeholders who are focused on similar outcomes to work together. And we knew many of the key players across academia, industry, and other groups, but we felt like a lot of these folks were siloed, either related to their discipline or geography. And because of this, we formed the coalition to gather folks in this space, and we now have about 30 active members ranging from farmers to researchers, biomass processors, as well as resource professionals. And in addition to that, we, as of I think a couple meetings ago, we have some coalition leadership as well, where we have two key members as co-chairs. And so Colleen Zumpf, who is a bioenergy and ecosystem service specialist at Argonne National Lab, and Matt Herman, who is the Chief Officer of Demand and Advocacy at Iowa Soybean Association, are the current co-chairs of the coalition. They support a lot of the meeting support, while I provide a lot of meeting coordination and program support, so we can all have quarterly meetings together and focus on our goals as a group. And so creating the network for this coalition has allowed professionals across the bioeconomy to gather and share ideas that support many of the projects we are working on across the region. And you can see from the graphic here, this is not the most current membership representation, but it's pretty close. Most of our representation includes researchers, nonprofits, and biomass processors. And we're always looking for more farmer representation, as well as anybody who's interested in moving our goals along. And so some of the notable member organizations that you may recognize, some of the folks here are part of this group as well, but CABI, Greenlands Blue Waters, Genera, Sunflower Fuels, City of Decatur, and many, many others are represented in this pie chart here. And so we're really grateful for their support and their ability to stick with us over these past 2 years, because a lot has changed with the coalition that I'll share just a little bit about. And so the key priorities of our group are to inform market development, to explore opportunities for ecosystem service financing, as well as to ID opportunities for adoption and processing in the Midwest. And lastly, to connect producers and industry folks to assess feasibility. We've aimed to prioritize these areas by engaging with a diverse group of stakeholders and inviting guest speakers in who can offer various perspectives on their sector of the bioeconomy, and to understand opportunities and barriers to adoption of perennial crops like Miscanthus and switchgrass and others. And so in addition to our priorities, we do have some concrete goals that we've been working towards since 2022. These aren't in order by priority, but our first goal was to create a resource directory to compile valuable educational and consulting resources that are regionally relevant for the Midwest, especially for the ag space and the bioenergy end use space. And so that was kind of our main focus, and I'll go into these goals in detail in just a moment. But our second goal is to support adoption of these crops and biomass utilization technologies on varying scales. So looking at on-farm utilization as well as more market development in the region as a whole. And this is done through policy advocacy. And so that was a big focus of the past year, and I'll kind of provide some context as to how we got to where we are now through that work. But finally, we're also focused on education and outreach to the agricultural community, the general public, as well as regional policy and decision making. And so I'll go through each one of these and share what's been done to date and what we're hoping to do in the future to achieve these 3 primary goals. And so first, I mentioned that we wanted to create a resource directory. This was the first goal that we achieved as a group in creating a space where we could compile as many regionally relevant pieces of information on perennial bioenergy cropping systems, end-use technology, financial information, kind of everything in between. And so we created that Google group, or Google Drive, essentially, to organize these materials and make it publicly accessible. And if you want to check it out, you're welcome to scan this little QR code with your phone here. And I can drop a link in the chat in just a moment to share that. And the objective of the resource directory is to provide a space for resource professionals, farmers, landowners, anybody who's interested to find resources specific to the Midwest, to those crops that they may be interested in, as well as specific end-use technologies such as anaerobic digestion, pyrolysis, and other on-farm energy uses. And so we wanted to make this both accessible for farmers as well as folks who may be consulting farmers. And so that's kind of the main goal behind this work. And we'll talk a little bit more about policy, but we also hope to leverage this directory to inform decision makers and other folks who may not know anything about bioenergy too. And so policy advocacy is another big part of this work, like I mentioned. So there's a lot of text on this slide, and I won't go through all of it, but we had 3 main policy advocacy goals that were kind of pie in the sky to begin this work back in 2022, understanding what policy drivers were either barriers to adoption or accelerating opportunities for farmers on the ground. We spent almost all of 2023 and 2024 learning from experts in the ag and energy policy space to share their foundational knowledge of these policies and to understand, for our group, to understand opportunities for advocacy under these 3 buckets. And while exploring all these opportunities, we realized that some of the structural challenges of our group, there were some structural challenges of our group to move forward with some of these, to move towards policy advocacy and create change on the ground. And so we do have multi-state representation within this group, which did make it inequitable to prioritize one state policy over the other. So we landed on focusing our efforts initially on federal ag policy within the Farm Bill. We found that through gathering evidence and just discussing as a group that the NRCS Conservation Reserve Program may be our biggest opportunity to work towards supporting adoption and utilization on the ground in the region. We learned from a lot of guest speakers in the bioenergy space and in the CRP conservation space that CRP ground provides a large barrier to adoption and utilization of native feedstocks because of harvesting restrictions. And so we initially were hoping to focus our advocacy towards changing some of the harvest restrictions within the CRP program, so farmers and landowners could leverage the biomass within these plots and also use harvest as a management practice for some of these native grasslands that are enrolled in CRP programs. Without going down a long rabbit hole on how we explored all of this, I'll just say that we had planned to support changes for that program with this past upcoming Farm Bill. And unfortunately, around November and December, when we saw there wasn't much momentum happening within the Farm Bill, we kind of decided to take a pause and understand, like, internally what our efforts are best focused on. And so, yeah, right now we are taking a pause on policy advocacy altogether just to take a beat and see any upcoming changes with this administration and what opportunities or barriers may come of that before we revisit working on policy. And so that leads us to our final goal, which is focusing on education. That's kind of the current focus right now, and we're hoping to prioritize education, working across sectors of the bioenergy space to educate farmers, consumers, and decision makers alike on the potential that these crops offer to the Midwestern landscape and economy. And our group plans to focus primarily on collaborating to develop technical resources to reach all of our audiences, as well as educating on market and end use opportunities, kind of like the photos in this slide. This is one of my teammates, Jean Brokish, who's holding one of the Miscanthus blocks that was made at the energy farm. And then a workshop space I hosted a perennial bioenergy crop workshop up in Minnesota, and they were actually utilizing biomass pellets for heating. So that was a really cool demonstration to see. And so raising awareness on things that are already happening and the potential for where we could go as a region is going to be the focus of our educational efforts. And so we plan to explore that in addition to the existing financial incentives out there and how to navigate some of these programs to strategically incorporate these perennials on farms for landowners and farmers. And so through that, we hope to create printed materials as well as continue giving presentations like this to uplift our work and to celebrate members who are doing amazing work to advance this in the Midwest. And so moving forward, we have a lot of really great ideas on how we can, put all of these plans into action. And some of the things that are front of mind for us right now are to obviously develop more educational materials and to do more outreach presentations like this to just raise awareness that we are a growing group. We're here despite a lot of the challenges that we've seen in the bioenergy space in the past, and to create opportunities to educate local consumers and regional policymakers alike. And internally, we're hoping and discussing the idea of formulating subcommittees to kind of drive some of this work and really hone in on what members can bring to the table in a way that works for their work outside of this coalition, but also supports the larger goals of the group. And we're also looking at planning our first in-person meeting this year, which is really exciting because we've all been meeting quarterly, virtually for the past couple years. So we think it's time that we all gather in person this year and really kind of put some of these plans to action. And so just my last note here is if you are interested in participating in these calls, we do have quarterly calls. Our next one is on March 24th, I believe. We have yet to finalize that, but March will definitely be when we gather next. And we're always looking for new representation, especially farmer voices, even if they're farmers who aren't growing these crops but may have interest or are seeing barriers to adoption. We always value those perspectives, as well as from biomass processors, researchers, and anybody else working on the ground in this space. We really encourage collaboration across the region. And so if you're interested, you can scan that QR code and indicate interest. I'll get that later. Or you can email me with any questions or interest about the project as a whole or the coalition specifically too. And so my email is there, and I'm happy to field any questions that come up. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlee. That was fantastic. And thanks for the work that you're doing. So everyone, if you have questions, you're always welcome to unmute and ask directly, or use the chat, whichever works best for you.
I see your question, Emily, about Illinois and other state agencies. So just to reiterate, Emily in the chat was asking interactions that we've had with Illinois or other state ag agencies. And to be completely honest, we haven't really gone there. We've inquired about CRP as a program generally and have learned from more state-based nonprofits who are kind of working in the policy space than actually engaging with these agencies, mainly because a lot of our initial goals were slow to form and weren't really aligning with some of the timelines, especially related to policy advocacy. So Yeah, that's not a great answer, but that's kind of where we started and took a pause after realizing that logistically state-based advocacy wasn't the best route for us.
So with that in mind, I agree state-based advocacy can be challenging, um, especially if you approach it as such. But I think we have some people here who might have experience just having conversations with their state officials about, what avenues those state officials might see that have traction rather than coming in with an a priori approach. So, I'm most familiar with the Iowa example, and maybe we'll get Matt Lechtenberg from the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship to do one of these calls. But my understanding, the way that worked, is that growers, of which we have a few here, reached out and said, "I'm interested in trying these crops, but I need help. What can you offer me?" And then so Iowa has a sort of flexible program that you have to reach out to the state ag agency to ask about, but then you can get support in iterative conversation with them as opposed to just signing up for something that's already been voted on.
Good to know. I'm gonna make note of that. We'll most likely discuss that, especially as education becomes more of a priority. We do have the opportunity to hone in on state action, and so yeah, I appreciate that. And if anybody who is in this call that like does engage with these state level organizations, I'd love to chat offline, or if you're interested in joining the next call, we'd love to have you.
Well, I do know there's Bill Belden is at least on the call, whether or not he has a chance to mention anything. And Ty Miller, I'm not sure, I don't think you worked with the University of Iowa yet when they were developing the relationship with Iowa Department of Natural Resources to get creative with the permitting on the power plant, but maybe you could comment on your relationship with Iowa DNR to use biomass.
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Ty Miller, University of Iowa. I work in utilities. We dabble in Miscanthus a little bit, and I was around Emily when we were restructuring our permit on the periphery a little bit. But long story short, it, the it was a new permitting method that we first for the DNR, of course, a first for us, where it just kind of allowed us flexibility to make modifications to the boilers, our systems to accommodate different fuels and not have to go for a permit switch for every little thing, every little trial, everything we wanted to do. So it was kind of an overarching limits for our entirety of campus and all of our operations that allowed us to pinch and mission here and increase one here. Just kind of gave us a flexibility to try stuff out and do what we wanted to do. That's kind of the long story short of our interaction with the DNR in the early days.
Thanks, Ty.
And I apologize, I'm not familiar with a lot of Iowa's systems at present. So to do permitting like that goes through DNR. In Iowa, they don't have their own like EPA the way that Illinois has like a state EPA.
I would say the DNR functions as an extension of the EPA, kind of. I think is fair to say. Is that a fair characterization, Emily?
I mean, at least all I know is that when it came to air permits for the power plant, DNR was the state organization that was the appropriate one to negotiate.
Yeah, and then there's a little bit of nuance to it because in the we have, for instance, not getting down in the weeds a whole lot, but we have one boiler that's under direct permitting by the EPA just because of the nature of it and when it was put in and the regulations it's under, and the rest of them are kind of have limits imposed by the state. So there's a little bit of nuance depending on when and what type of equipment.
Interesting. Oh, I'm seeing a question in the chat about how is educational and outreach efforts funded. We aren't doing any crowdsourced funding for this work yet. I mentioned it kind of in our intro that all of this work is funded under our technical assistance and research grant that's funded through the Department of Energy's Bioenergy's Technologies Office. And so we are a sub-award under a larger DOE project that Argonne National Lab is working on. So they are the primary recipient of those funds, and we are working in partnership with them. So hopefully that answers the question.
Can you comment a little bit about AFT's role in things like the Farm Bill? Or maybe just, so I'm just going to say a few things and you can tell me true or false and if I'm interpreting it correctly. So American Farmland Trust is an organization that developed with financial backing from Rockefeller family members who I think wanted to leave a better legacy than maybe some other Rockefeller family members. And they have evolved, the organization has evolved pretty rapidly, it seems like, in the last few years with changes in leadership at the national level, and you've grown dramatically as an organization. Two of the national board members are from Illinois. I'm not sure about the rest, but Jonathan Kappas from the University of Illinois is now on the national board, as is Lynn Clarkson, an organic grain farmer around central Illinois. And if I understand correctly, is AFT one of the organizations that's allowed to submit language that could be considered for the Farm Bill?
I believe we are, and we have a national policy team who is the sole kind of group within our organization to move that language forward. We have yet to really engage that team with a lot of this work just yet, because we were a little not super steady in our footing and understanding, like, if we wanted to submit a white paper, or if we wanted, where we wanted to focus specifically. So for this group, we haven't done much engagement with that team for the Farm Bill, but historically, yes. And we are very focused. Like, our headquarters is in Washington, and we have a national policy team who's very outspoken about Farm Bill priorities. And like you did say, in the 80s is where we started with that initial Farm Bill focused primarily on farmland protection. And we were an organization that was small and exclusively focused on farmland protection through agricultural conservation easements, I believe up until probably the early 2000s, when we really started to diversify and work regionally on more conservation agriculture.
So if this group, that's this webinar or the coalition in general, if we could identify examples of success and can maybe work with our state and local officials to kind of prototype, play with those, work out some kinks in a friendly way, that oftentimes these things can get partisan, but if you just work at the local level and try to solve problems with people who want to solve them, maybe we could bring some solutions. Or maybe you'd be in a position to take some potential solutions to that national team.
Absolutely. We do have policy folks on the state level. We have a Midwest policy manager who is very helpful in, one, educating our team on emerging policies and potential action that we can support, but is that conduit for that national team communication. And so I'm happy to loop her into a lot of these conversations, although our policy manager just started a couple weeks ago, so she's kind of getting her footing now. But yeah, we are poised to do that and hope to leverage that in the future.
Okay, I bring that. I mean, it's interesting to see the evolution of the coalition. I know there's been interest from many in the US and Canada around a biomass. I mean, I think it's been called different things, a biomass commodity group. There was one started out of Pennsylvania when Penn State had some big programs around biomass. How do you see the evolution of the coalition relating to its current configuration and maybe the needs of what's the word I'm looking for, but not a commodity group, but something along those lines.
Like a growers organization, essentially. I would love to see that. I think right now our biggest limiting factor is just capacity. Like, I was the only person kind of forming and managing this group up until recently. And so as long as we continue the momentum we have and maybe have policies to support more action on the ground, I'd love to see that, or at least like have a branch of it that's grower focused and can support farmers in that way.
Well, if any of us make money on biomass, we can start paying a check off.
Love to see that. I just want to back up and kind of uplift Heather's question about our policy manager connected to our coalition. Um, we So we've had a transition with our policy managers recently. We had one last year leave who had been with the organization for a while. And he had been in a couple of our coalition meetings in the early days trying to understand how he could support. Again, that was more of a capacity challenge, just to try to like fully integrate them into our coalition work. But now that we actually have this new policy manager, she's really amazing, and she came from the European bioenergy space before and was working on waste to energy with AD and like food waste removal. And so she's like very passionate about this topic in general. And so I imagine that once she's got her footing within the organization, we'll build in some more time for her to support some of that work. So yeah, TBD, it will be more interactive. And most of the, just to answer your second question, Heather, the grower researcher connection is pretty strong, although we kind of we structure our organization so the policy manager is kind of working with the folks who are more connected to the growers, like myself, or who do more project coordination. So they don't have specific initiatives that they're working on that engage farmers, but more integrated into all of the existing programs we have that have a policy element.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I was wondering if during our next quarterly meeting, we can meet this new policy manager. I'm curious to see how we can connect our research efforts with her.
Yeah, I will make sure. I'm hoping actually on Friday that we'll send out like the Zoom meeting and all of the, like the quarterly email to update folks on what we're focusing on. And once we have that sent out, I'm going to try to loop her in so she has it on her calendar.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's thank Marlee one more time. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and telling us about it today. I wanted to just make sure people know one funding opportunity that came up since we last met. Well, at least I know about it more now. So I mentioned that the University of Illinois and Iowa State, among other organizations on this call, AFT included, are part of a regional biomass resource hub that DOE just funded. And USDA actually has come out in their call for proposals with a specific funding allocation targeted towards USDA proposals that complement those hubs. So if anyone is thinking about submitting one of those proposals, let me know, let DK know, or any of us on the team, and we'd love to collaborate as you develop your proposal to make sure as we keep this regional thing going, that'll be a Midwest focus on those herbaceous energy crops. I can send out the link to that request for proposals after the meeting. Okay, so next week we have DK, and he'll tell us maybe a little bit about that, as well as the state of the switchgrass industry. And if there's nothing else, then we'll see you all next week. Thanks.